Bin Laden sits in Afghanistan. Every simple step, crossing borders or going on a plane or on a ship, will become more complicated. It's a time to launch a operational, concrete war against terror, even if it takes certain pains from the routine activities of our normal society. This is the time to deploy a globally concerted effort led by the United States, the UK, Europe, and Russia against all sources of terror. Consistently, along 6 or 10 years, Iran, Iraq, Libya, North Korea, this is the only way. Without this clarity of purpose, there will be no world order, no world order possible.
There is a chance for the President of the United States to use this disaster to carry out what his father, a phrase his father used, I think, only once, and hasn't been used since, and that is a new world order.
Was a great resolution passed at the United Nations last night that might bring about a new order in the world that would be better for all of us.
Preparing for this kind of event for nearly a decade. We've had presidential directives. It's a project called Homeland Defense. It's a project called Homeland Defense. It's a project called Homeland Defense. It's a project called Homeland Defense.
We have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations
circulating for a year and arguing for an aggressive U.S. foreign policy suddenly gained new relevance. In the blueprint, it says the process of transformation is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. Was 9/11 your Pearl Harbor?
Was effectively a charter of the Project for a New American Century, a neoconservative think tank in Washington.
The founding members included Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz of the Defense Department, Richard Pearl, head of the Defense Advisory Board, Louis Libby, Cheney's chief of staff, John Bolton, Undersecretary of State for Arms Control, Elliot Cohen, who's on the Defense Policy Board.
Much of what these men wanted is coming true. They urged that the U.S. abandon the anti-ballistic missile treaty. It has. They wanted establishment of more permanent U.S. military bases abroad. That is happening in the Philippines and in Georgia and will likely happen in Iraq. They urged regime change as a goal of foreign wars, not just in Iraq. They wanted the U.S. as a global constabulary, their word, unburdened by the UN or world opinion, preventing any challenge to U.S. dominance. But, they wrote, a year before September 11th, such aspirations are unlikely to be realized without a catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor.
In planning scenarios, gets almost into the catastrophic, where it's to prevent something like this from happening. Planes fly by, John.
Jettisoning what were intended to be his remarks on education, perhaps have a lot of new information.
Yeah, John, I've just been told from a U.S. law enforcement official that they're saying it is evident that this is a terrorist-related attack, and among the key targets, key people that they're looking at is Osama bin Laden. It was just
William Daley. Bill, I know that Osama bin Laden likes airplanes, and again, we are not attributing this act to his organization, but he was implicated in a plot to blow up something like 13 airliners in 13 days, or 8 in 8 days, that back in the Philippines back in the 1980s, I believe.
Exactly.
Airplanes have been his terrorist weapon of choice in the past. He was implicated in a plot to blow up something like 13 airliners in 13 days, or 8 in 8 days, that back in the Philippines back in the 1980s, I believe.
Exactly.
Airplanes have been his terrorist weapon of choice in the past.
want you to move all the people away from the building. Away from the building. I want you to move all the people away from the building.
Building is going to collapse. Nothing information.
Area, the second tower is coming down.
They tell you the second tower is
Yes, it's about to collapse.
Away from the building. I want you to move all the people away from the building. Away from the building. I want you to move all the people away from the building.
Management, and we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. And it did collapse before we could actually get out of the building. So we...
Go home! Everybody go home! Take the day off! They're blowing up the building! It's terrorist attacks! It's terrorist attacks! Go home! They're blowing up the building! Get out of the street! Go home! Go back!
However, when the buildings collapsed, we could hear a rumble, which was about 5 seconds long, preceding the actual collapse, and then a boom when each of those towers collapsed. And then one person described it as a strange sucking noise as the buildings did implode after that. Now,
suddenly I hear. Suddenly I hear.
Huge explosion. Everyone's running in the other direction.
Whenever I tell people about the sounds, sights and sounds that I heard on that day, the thing that got me suspicious was when I saw the replay of everything the next week and the week after, they took the explosions out. That's how I knew something was up. And the detonations that took both buildings down were exactly identical. First, it started off with about, I'm just guessing, 6 or 7 seconds of this very low frequency rumble, and then the detonation started, and they went boom, boom. They were a little less than a second. Second tower number one, the second tower collapsed. It was the exact same series of detonations, to the T, the exact same series of detonations. And I just stood there, I didn't move, and I got to feel and hear the whole thing. And I can tell you that the air pressure changed. It was like all of a sudden being like in a submarine 300 feet below the surface.
At one point, we had an explosion that came by that was pretty close, and it shook the stairway.
It is obvious that only explosives can create this kind of waves. When you hit a solid, the frequency is above 10 Hertz. And here, the frequency which was recorded is under 0.5, 0.6, 0.5 Hertz. And only explosives or earthquakes can create this kind of wave frequencies. Explosions. They record only what I said, subaerial and subterranean explosions. And we can see that the Tower 1 was collapsed by subterranean, an important subterranean explosion, but the Tower 2 and the Tower 7 was collapsed only by explosion at the surface, the ground surface.
Suddenly I hear suddenly I hear
created a vacuum, and it starts sucking the smoke from the cross streets and in the air towards the core. Created a vacuum, and it starts sucking the smoke from the cross streets and in the air towards the core. And in my head, like they're bombing the financial area. I gotta go save my wife.
The building is going to contain not 2 million feet, but 1.7 million. And that's one of the sacrifices we have to make. I said, let's make it and let's get on with it. And so, next thing you know, we got the designs of the building. And the first design meeting was in April of 2000. And construction began. Shortly thereafter, in 2002.
"9/11 hearings, Condoleezza Rice is asked about this presidential briefing, and she says, "We didn't think it had anything to do with anything specific. It seemed to be just some general thing that we already knew, that bin Laden had some plans to attack the United States, and we didn't consider it all that significant." But you point out something in the book I thought was quite interesting, I personally hadn't seen before, which is in something called the SEIB, the Senior Executive Intelligence Brief, which is essentially normally, if I understand correctly, more or less what's in the presidential brief, but it goes to many more people. That whole memo on bin Laden has been taken out. Well, if they consider it so not of any great significance one way or the other, why on earth would they take it out?
One explanation would be that they didn't want there to be a broadcast of the possibility that we might be under specific threat of terrorists using airplanes.
Remote control, the key to 9/11. Remote control is something we're familiar with. We may use remote control software to log into a remote computer, or a remote for your television set to turn it on, or change the channel, or change the volume. We also may use remote control for opening our garage door or closing it. Remote control can also be used in aircraft.
And we will look at all kinds of technologies to make sure that our airlines are safe, and for example, including technology to enable controllers to take over distressed aircraft and land it by remote control.
But even at that time, remote control technology had been successfully demonstrated for commercial jetliners for nearly 2 decades. This is actual footage of a joint NASA-FAA experiment conducted in 1984 at Edwards Air Force Base, in which a Boeing 720 was remote controlled through multiple takeoffs and landings before being crashed in a controlled impact demonstration. In August of 2001, this technology was further demonstrated by Raytheon, which successfully took off and landed a Boeing 727 6 times at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico without a pilot on board. Raytheon also developed a sensor suite for the Air Force's Global Hawk drones, and Raytheon Network-Centric Systems has recently won multiple contracts to help develop advanced communication systems for the E-4B, the US government's so-called doomsday plane that was spotted above the White House shortly before the strike on the Pentagon, and which has since been confirmed was one of 4 functioning doomsday planes operating in the skies on that day.
It appeared overhead just before 10 a.m., a 4-engine jet banking slowly in the nation's most off-limits airspace, on the White House grounds and the rooftop, a nervous scramble.
About 10 minutes ago, there...
On the evening of September 10th, 2001, at Dulles International Airport, the rush was over. Argonne-Bright security employee Eric Gill had just returned to supervising the West checkpoint. He saw something strange. Gill, a Pakistani man who fled to the U.S. to escape religious persecution, did not want his face shown.
I saw about 5
Middle Eastern people. They were walking through the side door we have at West Checkpoint, which is accessed by only few restricted people. I noticed that 3 of them were wearing a uniform and IDs. 2 other guys who were not wearing a uniform and had no IDs, and they were trying to escort these 2 guys through there. As soon as they walked inside the checkpoint, they just stopped there and started watching around. That made me suspicious.
Gill's suspicions were well placed. The men, dressed in United Airlines ground workers' uniforms, wanted access to a door that led to the concourse and parked planes. The men tried to use one electronic badge to swipe through. Gill stopped them.
They didn't like it, and he abused me, and he said, "F off. We are people you don't know. You should be allowed to go through here, but you make your own rules." And he just walked out with it.
Eric Gill and other witnesses took no further action, but the Middle Eastern men were not through. Gill would later identify 2 of the men as the Al-Qaeda hijackers of a plane from Boston, as well as American Airlines Flight 77.
Probably the most incredibly poor decision made by the authorities was that the key security guard at Dulles Airport, who was the last man between the airplanes and the hijackers, was never questioned about what he saw on the night of September 10th.
With color photographs of the hijackers that he was finally able to make a positive ID.
And I said, "These 2 guys, I have seen them. I know these were the 2 who were there at the airport."
It didn't matter. The FBI was done with Gill.
We don't know if there were accomplices working at Dulles Airport with the hijackers that were never arrested. And this is one of the biggest holes in the 9/11 case.
They knew right away, and there was many of people coming through that checkpoint at the same time.
But Ed, how would they know? The FBI claimed they had no idea who these hijackers were.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, it boggles my mind.
What it says to me is if they knew them that morning, they knew who they were the day before, and they should have been able to catch them before they got to the airport.
Orders arrived from Washington, D.C., the headquarters of the Federal Aviation Administration. They want Anchorage Center to tell the Korean airliner to change its squawk to 7500, the emergency number to be used only in one situation: hijack. This order would make KAL Flight 085 the only airliner in the sky on 9/11, and perhaps ever, to deliberately squawk 7500. For 18 long minutes, Anchorage Center does not act on Washington's order. Phone calls are made to question the order because it is so unusual and because lives are at stake. Exactly who talked to who and what was said is being withheld by authorities. What is unexplained is why the aircraft was ordered to turn on its hijack signal, and which agencies were in the know about that decision.
Yeah, I've never had to issue a hijack squawk to an aircraft. I mean, we can issue an emergency code if we think the aircraft is having an issue, and what they do when they squawk, there's 3 particular codes that they can squawk, and it's basically emergency radio failure hijack. And it actually tags up on other controller scopes, and also scopes down the lower 48, if like at the command center, anybody, probably the military. I can't really speak to how their equipment works, but it just kind of tags them up a little bit differently. So it's a more pronounced target on the scope. So I've never had to do it before. I never had to do it after that. It was a strange request at the time. I never read it in the books where you had to do that. I've never, you know, we wouldn't necessarily ever issue that code to an aircraft because the way I look at it, it's not ours to issue, it's the pilot's to issue because it's a very serious code. So the 7500 squawk was the hijack code. Was actually a supervisor came down and said we need to have the Korean Air squawk 7500, and I said, well, I didn't really think it was the right thing to do. So they actually left and regrouped and talked about it, and I had my opinions of why it wasn't, But then later I was ordered to do it. So.
And what were your thoughts? Why did you not want to do that?
We'd already had some miscommunication with the military that morning. There'd already been some threats to shoot down some aircraft, one that I was particularly working. There were probably others that happened to, that if they didn't follow whatever air traffic commands that we issued at the time, that they would be shot down. And I had an aircraft that was just south of Anchorage. On his way in, he was told to land at Anchorage. And at 40 miles south of Anchorage, I was told to turn him or he would be shot down. And
24, Anchorage Center radios Korean Air Flight 085 and delivers this astonishing message.
Korean Air 085 Center.
Yes, Center, Korean Air 085, go ahead.
Korean Air 085, squawk 75.
Confirm squawk 75 with 00.
Korean Air 085, affirmative.
Okay.
What could possibly explain this strange and monumental instruction? To this day, even the RCMP are as much in the dark as anyone else.
Speaking to the pilot, I mean, he was quite adamant, that he was instructed. I mean, that was his explanation, that he was instructed to. And he thought that was a strange request at the time.
The dangerous order is given to the airliner at about the same time it is directed to fly to Whitehorse. For the next 90 minutes, as it cruises at 37,000 feet over the skies of Alaska and the Yukon, Korean Air 085 emits the ominous hijack signal continuously until it is on the ground in Whitehorse. As Yukon schools evacuate and ring their fire alarm bells, the hostile 747 enters Canadian airspace, along with the cargo flight 281, 2 fighter jets, an AWACS surveillance aircraft, and at least 1 refueling jet for the F-15s. Flight 085 is handed off from Anchorage Center to Edmonton Air Traffic Control, squawking 7500 and running low on fuel because of the extra time and distance it has had to travel. In Whitehorse, RCMP Inspector Grant is sure of one thing: it was not a language problem.
Time, which is interesting, and they've tried to explain that away as well. She'd already told somebody at American Airlines that it was Flight 12, and that's the other American Airlines person saying that. But that means she said it misidentified the flight twice as Flight 12. It was supposed to be Flight 11. Flight 12, of course, was the reverse flight of Flight 11. Flight 11 was Boston to Los Angeles. Flight 12 was Los Angeles to Boston. Now, the official explanation for this is all that she was nervous about the hijacking, so she mixed up the flight number and wasn't that understandable. But the problem comes with the other flight attendant, Madeline Amy Sweeney, also misidentified it as Flight 12. And let's quote the FBI's records. They're talking about Sweeney's call to Evelyn Nunez in American Airlines Services, quote, Flight 12 at gate 32 had 2 flight attendants stabbed, unquote. And that call was cut off quickly. She called back again and got Michael Woodward in American Airlines Flight Services, and he wrote down Flight 12 and crossed it out and put Flight 11. So both flight attendants made the same mistake. How could they both make that error and call it Flight 12? Well, it certainly looks like this is a scripted drill. The script has misidentified the flight as 12 instead of 11. Eventually, the flight attendants got it out with the director of the drill, and but there's no way that both flight attendants could have made the same mistake. Throat cut. Yeah. 2 flight attendants have been stabbed, and there's not even a quiver in Ong's voice. She's very calm, and this has been attributed to her professionalism, and I want to say that I believe she was professional, but I think that the reason for the calmness in the flight attendants' calls is because they really thought they were just in a drill.
It was a drill.
It's not a slur. It's not, we're not slighting their professionalism, but they're so calm in the middle of this bloodshedding because they think that it's really just a drill and they're just reading from a script. And there's other anomalies, too, in this call. She said that the hijacker stood upstairs, and you'll find this in the FBI documents, which I linked to from the web article. Now, here's the problem with that, Richie, is that Boeing 747s have stairs, but Boeing 767s, which this flight was, do not have any stairs. The 747s do have stairs leading to the cockpit. The idea what she was conveying was that there was a hijacker standing on the stairs guarding the way to the cockpit. Well, that couldn't be. And so once again, we're confronted with, apparently you've got a script writer for this drill who've been used to traveling on 747s. And
through his lawyer, has told the FBI that al-Omari is actually safe in Saudi Arabia and should be presenting himself to U.S. officials in that country. We were told he would be presenting himself yesterday. And they are claiming, those associates of al-Omari who are in custody, one associate of al-Omari, is claiming that all of this associating to them is a case of mistaken identity. So we must tell viewers that while there are names on this list, it could be that they are perhaps stolen identity. Leon?
All right, Eileen O'Connor, thank you very much.
Saw one of them. His partner said they've got 2 more to give 3 out of the 4 black boxes. And we've also talked to an airline investigative specialist who says never in the annals of history have they ever found where they couldn't at least find the black boxes. You guys, everybody at this site went through that debris with such a fine-tooth comb, they were finding bone fragments the size of nail clippings and DNA matching it. Yet we're told the black boxes, for the first time in history, destroyed, gone, never found them. I'm expected to believe that. Right, well, you believe that? Then where are they?
I don't know where they are. I don't know where they are. I don't know where they are.
Even bin Laden's displays of strength for the Western media were faked. The fighters in this video had been hired for the day and told to bring their own weapons. For beyond his own small group, bin Laden had no formal organization, until the Americans invented one for him. In January 2001, a trial began in a Manhattan courtroom of 4 men accused of the embassy bombings in East Africa. But the Americans had also decided to prosecute bin Laden in his absence. But to do this under American law, the prosecutors needed evidence of a criminal organization, because as with the mafia, that would allow them to prosecute the head of the organization, even if he could not be linked directly to the crime. And the evidence for that organization was provided for them by an ex-associate of bin Laden's called Jamal al-Fadl.
During the investigation of the 1998 bombings, there is a walk-in source, Jamal al-Fadl, who's a Sudanese militant who was with bin Laden in the early 90s, who has been passed around a whole series of Middle Eastern secret services, none of whom want much to do with him, who ends up in America and is taken on by the American government effectively as a key prosecution witness and given a huge amount of American taxpayers' money at the same time. His account is used as raw material to build up a picture of Al-Qaeda. The picture that the FBI want to build up is one that will fit the existing laws that they will have to use to prosecute those responsible for the bombing. Now, those laws were drawn up to counteract organised crime, the mafia, drugs crime, crimes where people being a member of an organisation is extremely important. You have to have an organisation to get a prosecution. And you have al-Fadl and a number of other witnesses, a number of other sources who are happy to feed into this, who've got material that, looked at in a certain way, can be seen to show this organisation's existence. You put the two together and you get what is the first bin Laden myth, the first Al-Qaeda myth, and because it's one of the first, it's extremely influential.
The picture al-Fadl drew for the Americans of bin Laden was of an all-powerful figure at the head of a large terrorist network that had an organised hierarchy of control. He also said that bin Laden had given this network a name, Al-Qaeda. It was a dramatic and powerful picture of bin Laden, but it bore little relationship to the truth. The reality was that bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri had become the focus of a loose association of disillusioned Islamist militants who were attracted by the new strategy. But there was no organisation. These were militants who mostly planned their own operations and looked to bin Laden for funding and assistance. He was not their commander. There is also no evidence that bin Laden used the term Al-Qaeda to refer to the name of a group until after September the 11th, when he realized that this was the term the Americans had given him.
The Taliban. Are you still of the view that Al-Qaeda is more of a myth than a reality? It's what you said last year. You also said you weren't even sure that they existed. Really?
Exactly, that's my view today as well.
That Al-Qaeda is a myth?
It is for me a myth. I have never had a report from any Afghan source on the Al-Qaeda or what they were doing. We don't see them, we cannot visualize them. For us, they don't exist. I've never had a report from our intelligence, I've never had a report from our people, I've never come across them.
Did they exist in September the 11th? On September the 11th, 2001, was Al-Qaeda operating in Afghanistan?
I have come across the Taliban, I've come across other groups, I've come across the people called, calling themselves different names, different outfits of extremists and terrorists. We have reports about them. I don't know if Al-Qaeda existed and I don't know if they exist. For me, it's a myth. I have to feel tangible about it before I can say they are there. Well, reports say they are there, but I have no information.
Your allies in the US government,
se.
your allies in the US government, NATO forces on the ground in Afghanistan all said that they were there fighting Al-Qaeda fighters. When you say it's a myth, you've not seen any evidence, did they call you a conspiracy theorist? Some might say you sound like a conspiracy theorist.
Well, if saying that something does not exist does not mean a conspiracy. It's my judgment, it's my feeling. Maybe they are there, but I have not seen them and I have not had a report about them. Any report that would indicate that Al-Qaeda is operating in Afghanistan. And I've also been in conversation with various American officials. The last one that I had was last year, in which they told me that there are perhaps not even more than 30 to 35 individuals. So if that's the entire strength of an organization, for me, that's a myth.
Yeah, well, the meeting was for my own newspaper, the London Independent, not for The Nation, though I did write a piece for The Nation. It was looking back on it, I suppose it was a prescient meeting, although at the time, of course, it was interesting enough. We knew that the Americans were fingering bin Laden as the man behind attacks on American troops in the Gulf. We knew that bin Laden was being accused of running an international network of World Terror Inc. And when I approached him, I think he thought I was going to ask him about World Terror Inc. But in fact, copy of the newspaper later on. And apparently he thought it was fair. He expected it was all going to be about World Terror Inc.
Hey, so I work at a very prestigious hospital. I ran into someone who was under a little sedation and spilled a lot of info. Let's just say he has blood ties to some very prominent figures. If you want, you can call me. Separate instances. Info about 9/11 and cancer research using nanotechnology. Let's just say his wife's bloodline rhymes with the name Meghan. This gentleman was the consultant on the Star Wars project. Yes, I'll never forget it. Dude was part of the Reagan administration. He mentioned thermite explosives.
Pieces of structural steel that could have proved the temperature the steel had reached and the use of explosives. Why did Tower 2 that was hit last?
Addresses, phone numbers, names, email addresses, and large fragments of conversation over digital telecommunications networks. The log file spans the entire 48 hours between September 11, 2001 and September 12, 2001, capturing all unencoded digital communications sent in the USA. Through analysis, the messages can be pieced together to form full conversations, and some can even be pieced together to find the emails and names of those whom sent the messages. Upon preliminary analysis, a couple communication lines have been identified of those used by the Secret Service. The messages revealed that members of the Secret Services were ordered to not enter NYC. and agents embedded in the city were led through several meeting points. At one point they were ordered to evacuate Stuyvesant High School, in the words of command, by any means necessary. Towards the end of the day, the Secret Service was ordered to meet at Chelsea Pier to board a ferry to depart NYC. This just in itself raises several questions. Firstly, what were SS agents doing in New York, and why weren't they ever made aware of there being a terrorist threat? Secondly, why were they ordered to leave the city, instead of staying planted to investigate? Thirdly, who or what was it at Stuyvesant High School, whom were so important and had to be evacuated, by any means necessary? Why were SS agents ordered to stay home on September 12th? And lastly, what was the purpose of boarding a ferry, where was its destination, and who exactly other than the SS were on board? This is only a tiny fraction of a large amount of relevant and secretive information contained in the documents. This data can be correlated to many of the facts of the 9/11 cover-up we have already discovered. By using this data, a minute-by-minute analysis of the events of the day in detail, including communications between important players on the subject, can easily be created. Thus, we will finally have a full and detailed picture of the true events of September 11th, along with the evidence to take those responsible to court for a long overdue prosecution.